Good morning. Good morning, dear students of PG Semester 1, CC2, Unit 2. This is good morning. This is the online class lecture note of Professor S.K. Paul, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. I am dealing with this time CC2 and Unit 2, King Lear. So King Lear is the text that I have been assigned to deal with. Today I'm going to deliver my lecture on the topic humanity and philosophy in Shakespeare's King Lear, as well as I will give you the critical analysis of Act 3 from 1 to 7. So let us begin. The notions of moral philosophy related to Renaissance humanism that we find in King Lear is on the whole concerned with wisdom, the eye, and nature. The three elements, however, disparate on the surface of things today, were in their own time closely related. Wisdom was a pivotal issue that implicated the unconditional pursuit of the ends of a moral philosophy for self perfection. In his treatise of moral philosophy, for example, Baldwin described ideal men as those who apply their minds to search and to know the nature of things, which sort we call philosophers, and that is to say, lovers of wisdom. Other moral philosophers describe the proximity of wisdom to philosophy regularly with much the same emphasis as Baldwin, and we find the issue of wisdom central in the development of King Lear's two protagonists, Lear and Gloucester. The challenge that faces both of Shakespeare's characters on their path to wisdom, as Caron spoke of the ascent to it, was to come to know themselves that man is accounted a wise man, that best knoweth after the best and most excellent manner to play the man, that is to say, that knowing himself and the condition of man. The person who wanted to excel was the one who sought wisdom through the inevitable medium of self knowledge. Now, what is the existentialism in Shakespeare's tragedy King Lear? In the plays of Shakespeare, the self takes center stage. Shakespeare's characters are constantly struggling to define themselves within the environments they inhabit, and for Stephen Greenblatt, the power to impose a shape upon oneself is an aspect of the more general power to control identity, that of others at least as often as one's own. Greenblatt, for example, it is the individual who brings himself into unity to make himself a being, to act authentically toward self recognition and acceptance of self as part of a community and unity. The philosophy of Shakespeare's play, and particularly the King Lear, however, is often at odds with the prevailing philosophical beliefs of the time. Naturalism and humanism were the dominant approaches towards the human experience. Shakespeare, though, introduces a competing philosophy in which an existential search for self is central to human existence. Warren Taylor suggests, amid the turbulence of Lear's last days, Shakespeare so contrasts the substance of what Lear actually was with his almost willful mutilation of his identity as person. As Shakespeare sets his own vision of King Lear in opposition to the naturalism of Francis Bacon, the philosophy employed in the play's tragedy comes closer to the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre 3 centuries later. Lear rejects the natural order of the world and sets out on a search for truth through existential crisis. Like this existentialism and like this existentialist philosophers, Shakespeare is deliberately criticizing the systematic philosophies as superficial and removed from the actual human experience. The central preoccupation of existentialist philosophy is a concern for man's being in reality. Existentialism is the philosophy of human existence. In existentialism, an individual begins their journey disoriented and confused in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world. Central to the human condition is the imposition of severe limitations. Life is extremely bounded. Primarily, it is bounded by birth and death. Not only that, but the individual is stuck in this particular time, in this particular place. The individual is a prisoner to time and space, as each of us has only a very limited amount of time in this world. King Lear has a mythical, almost fairy tale element. Catherine Belsey recognizes the story of Cinderella as an appropriate parallel in that Lear's stage competition is as arbitrary and unmotivated as any folk level test. Cordelia is a Cinderella figure. There are two sisters, selfish and mean. The third is not only beautiful but is also good. In the natural world, the virtues that Cordelia represent, truth, humility, and grace, will triumph over the arrogance and greed of Gonadil and Regan. Shakespeare's audience is invited to choose Cordelia. Lear, however, defies the natural order because he envisions a separate order to things. In Lear's universe, daughters placate the strange whims of their fathers, and Cordelia of all should love for more. Taylor observes to Lear, his image of himself is that of a king and father who is wise and just, and his image of a family, is that of children who because they are children, cater to his personal pleasures. The division of his kingdom and the disinheritance of a daughter who will not flatter him are beyond reproach. Cordelia's inability to play into Lear's reality threatens to disorient the order of things for Lear. His subsequent rejection of Cordelia is his way of maintaining order subconsciously. Self deception is key to the tragedy of Lear, and here Sartre's concept of bad faith is most evident. But faith is defined as a lie to oneself within the limits of one's own single consciousness. Sartre argues that as a being compelled to decide the meaning of being, most of time we flee anguish in bad faith. Goneril, you see how full of changes his age is. The observation we have made of it hath not been a little. He always loved our sister most, and with what poor judgment he hath now cast her off, appears too grossly. Then Reagan replies, it is the infirmity of his age, yet he had ever but slenderly known himself. Act 1, Scene 1, lines 296 to 302. It is ironic that Reagan and Goneril, so superficial and false in the competition, see the truth of Lear. Lear. While Lear is old, perhaps senile, it is Lear's tragedy. Lear's tragedy to have always been blind to himself in vain. Kent challenges Lear's judgment. Thinks thou that duty shall have a dread to speak when power to flattery bows, to plainness honors bound, when majesty falls to folly. Lear's self-deception has finally caught up with him to the detriment of the perceived natural order. One of the essential concepts in existentialism is Heidegger's thrownness, or uh, um, um, Geoffenheit in the original German of our being hurled into the world and unable to reflect upon our situation. Lear defies this condition for Gloucester towards the end of their journey. We came carrying hither, thou know'st the first time that we smell the air, we vow and cry. When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools. This is in Act 4, Scene 6, lines 167 to 72. The last, uh, the last line implies Lear's own participation in the stage of fools. The concept is further illustrated in Lear's initiation into his existential crisis. As existential crisis is a stage of development at which an individual questions the very foundations of life. Lear's crisis is provoked by the rejection of Cordelia and the division of his kingdom. The crisis initiates, however, when Lear visits Goneril. Lear presumes the natural order is still intact, but when Goneril does not oblige his entourage, Lear begins to lose his grip on reason. Lear. Does any does any here know me? Why, this is not Lear. Doth Lear walk thus? Speak thus? Where are the eyes? Either his notion weakens, or his discernings are lethargized. Ha, sleeping or waking. Sure, it is not so. Fool it is, fool is it that can tell me who I am. Fool. Lear's shadow. You are Lear's shadow. Lear. I would learn that, for by thy marks of sovereignty, knowledge, and reason, I should be false persuaded I had daughters. Act 1, Scene 4. Sartre found the essence of the existential crisis in the work of Dostoevsky. If God does not exist, all things would be permitted. Thus, if the actions of the Gondadil and Reagan are to be permitted, then for Lear, God must cease to exist. Lear rages against the gods. Rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricanes spout till you have drenched our steeples. Act 3, Scene 2. An existential crisis may lead to a state of dissonance in which the individual holds conflicting emotional reactions resulting in surprise, dread, anger, or embarrassment. The audience witnesses Lear go through all these emotions as he struggles to fathom the situation he has been thrown into. Like a newborn baby, Lear cries at the sight of his new world. I am ashamed that thou hast power to shake my manhood thus, that these hot tears which break from me perforce should make thee worth them. Act 1, Scene 4. Another essential concept in existentialism is being towards others, and Lear is ill-equipped to exist among other beings. Lear is at once a tyrant. Come not between the dragon and his wrath, Act 1, Scene 1, and infant who never learned tact as it was never necessary to learn. A large part of the play is Lear's education in humanity. He has, for one thing, to unlearn court flattery. They told me I was everything. It is a lie. I am not argue proof. He must learn to take responsibility in his actions. Lear's education, however, is more than an education in humanity. It is an education in the bare fundamentals of the human condition. When Lear sees poor Tom with nothing but a blanket around him, he says, unaccommodated man is no more, but such a poor, bare-forked animal as thou art. Lear learns to strip off appearance and to face reality. But his initiation into humanity is a rough one is a rough one. Only through suffering does he learn to have concern for the suffering of others. He sees with a penetrating insight into the into the injustice of the social order and his own failures as king. Poor naked wretches, wheresoever you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm. How shall your houses, hates, and unfed sights you looked and windowed raggedness defined you from seasons such as these? Oh, I have taken too little care of this. Take physic, pump, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayst shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. Act 3, Scene 4. When Lear awakes from his existential journey, he embraces the miraculous reality of Cordelia's love. Though his journey, Lear has become an authentic being. Authenticity is the greatest existential virtue. To be an authentic person is to be one who faces the human condition, resolutely accepts his finitude, and his death, creatively responds to life and assumes responsibility for all the decisions. It is a new and spiritually reborn Lear who asks little of his life except to be with Cordelia. Come, let us away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I will kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. Act 5. This new humility is in remarkable contrast to the old arrogance. Existentialist philosophy often focuses on the experience of anguish as well as other commonly shared emotions such as love and hate. Anguish Anguish is experienced in difficult decisions or choices, but anguish existentially is defined as one's feeling in the face of existence as a whole. Hate pervades the play, for example, in Lear's terrible curse on Goneril, into her womb convey a sterility, and his calling Goneril and Regan unnatural hags. Hatred is evident as well in the quarrel between Albany and Goneril, where it my fitness to let these hands obey my blood. They are apt enough to dislocate and tear thy flesh and bones. Act 4, Scene 2, lines 64 from 64 to 67. The threat is strong, coming from a milk-livered man. King Lear is a play of extremes, and the love is as uncontained as the hate. Cordelia's devotion to her father, though at first stubbornly naive, is shown in few words and eloquent acts, and represents love in its purest form. Love does not seek to alter that which it loves, as Schiller writes, but but brings about the continuous emergence of ever higher, ever Lear as being is filled with a terrible anguish due to the experience of ingratitude and betrayal. The anguish is at the heart of the play. It is clear as well that the blinded Gloucester is experiencing his own anguish on par with Lear's. Gloucester's realization of his own bad faith comes too late as he pays for his blindness with eyes. Oh my folly, oh my follies, then Edgar was abused. King Gods, King Gods, forgive me that and prosper him. Despite his lack of sight, Gloucester sees the condition of a man as clearly as Lear. I have no way, and therefore want no eyes. I stumbled when I saw full of its sin. Our means secured us, and our mere defects prove our commodities. O dear son Edgar, the fate, the food of thy abused father's wrath, might I but live to see thee in my touch. I would say I had eyes again. Act 4, Scene 1. Similar to some existentialists, Gloucester rejects the will of God as flies to wanton boys, and we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Act 4, Scene 1, lines from 41 to 42. This comes in a fit of despair, however, and should not be taken for the ultimate philosophy of the play. Anguish is so very evident in the tragedy of King Lear that it becomes not about individual anguish, but about the pure existential anguish of being. Another essential concept in existentialist thought is the awareness of time and death. In King Lear, the theme is enforced by Lear's response to Gloucester's desire to kiss Lear's hand. Let me wipe it first. It smells of mortality. It is present too in the Gloucester's attempted suicide. Henceforth I will bear affliction till it do cry out itself, enough, enough, and die. As Camus, Alvia Camus, professed, there is only one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Further, it is difficult to ignore the short time that Lear and Cordelia have together after their reconciliation. From that moment on, the play quickens to its tragic end. This is paralleled by the even shorter time that Edgar and Gloucester enjoy together. The redemption of Lear and Gloucester into authentic beings seems to bring death along with joy, so that death and redemption are simultaneous. Death does not suffer fools and comes inevitably for all, good or bad. Death becomes so inevitable in King Lear that Edgar's death is announced. Albany notes that that's but a trifle here. However, the possibility of transcendence is not outside the realm of existentialism or King Lear. Under the imminent shadow of death, Lear and Cordelia experience a love that seems to transcend time and space. The transcendence, however, is not immortality or heaven. So, howl, 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 howl. Four times howl, 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 howl. Oh, you are made of stones. Had I your tongues and eyes, I would use them so that heaven's vault should crack. She is gone forever. I know when one is dead and when one lives. She is dead as earth. The transcendence perhaps exists. Uh, the transcendence perhaps exists in whatever kindness man shows, whether truth man uncovers, or whatever man creates before death comes. The theme of seeing and blindness runs throughout the play and may guide us to the true nature of being. When Gloucester meets Lear after his suicide attempt, Lear commands Gloucester to read. Gloucester replies, "What with the case of eyes?" Then Lear says, oh, are you there with me? No eyes in your head, nor no money in your purse. Your eyes are in a heavy case, your purse in a light. Yet you see how the world goes. Act 4, Scene 6, lines from 137 to 40. Gloucester responds, I see it feelingly. To see feelingly, to see with the sense of touch, and more than that, to see with empathy, to see intuitively. This is what Lear learned when He learned to see what naked riches are exposed to. For Sartre, essence is something discovered through existence. It is not inherent in existence. Man, first of all, exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world and defines himself afterwards. Existentialism is not a distinct philosophy. The term refers to many writers and writings often applied after the fact. The central trope of existentialism, however, is the human condition within the actual experience of existence. When examined closely, it is not unreasonable to declare King Lear and and existential work. For Shakespeare, the old and current philosophies were not sufficient enough to define the actual experience of man's existence. Shakespeare challenges the natural order through Lear's great journey of existential anguish and proves that the human experience is far more disoriented and confused. For Lear and indeed Shakespeare, the only path to self knowledge or authentic being is through suffering. Oh, matter and impertinency mixed reason in madness. In Act in Act 3, Scene 1 of King Lear, we find certain scenes that is very interesting. Scene 1, a storm rages on the heath. Kent, uh, Kent, seeking Lear in vain, runs into one of Lear's knights and learns that Lear is somewhere in the area. Accompanied only by his fool, Kent gives the knight secret information. He has heard that there is unrest between Albany and Cornwall, and that there are spies for the French in the English courts. Kent tells the knight to go to Dover, the city in England nearest to France, where we may find friends who will help Lear's cause. He gives the knight a ring and orders him to give it to Cordelia, who will know who has sent the knight when she sees the ring. Kent lives to search for Lear. Scene 2. Meanwhile, Lear wanders around in the storm, cursing the weather and challenging it to its worst against him. He seems slightly irrational, his thoughts wandering from idea to idea, but always returning to fixate on his two cruel daughters. The fool who accompanies him urges him to humble himself before his daughters and seek shelters indoors, but Lear ignores him. Kent finds the two of them and urges them to take shelter inside a nearby hovel. Lear finally agrees and follows Kent toward the hovel. The fool makes a strange and confusing prophecy. Scene 3. Inside his castle. Inside his castle, a worried Gloucester speaks with Edmund. The loyal Gloucester recounts how he became uncomfortable when Regan, Goneril, and Cornwall shut Lear out in the storm. But when he urged them to give him permission to go out and help Lear, they become angry, took possession of his castle and ordered him never to speak Lear or plead on his behalf. Gloucester tells Edmund that he has received news of a conflict between Albany and Cornwall. He also informs that a French army is invading and that part of it has already landed in England. Gloucester feels that he must take Lear's side and now plans to go seek him out in the storm. He tells Edmund that there is a letter with news of his of the French army locked in his room, and he asks his son to go and distract the Duke of Cornwall, while he, Gloucester, goes into the heath to search for Lear. He adds that it is imperative that Cornwall not notice his absence, otherwise Gloucester might die for his treachery. When Gloucester leaves, Edmund privately rejoices at the opportunity that has presented itself. He plans to betray his father immediately, going to Cornwall to tell him about both Gloucester's plans to help Lear and the location of the traitorous letter from the French. Edmund expects to inherit his father's title, land, and fortunate as soon as Gloucester is put to death. Now, from scenes 1 to 3, the information that Kent gives the knight brings the audience out of the personal realm of Lear's anguish and into the political world of Lear's Britain. Throughout the play, we hear rumors of conflict between Albany and Cornwall and of possible war with France, but what exactly transpires at any specific moment is rarely clear. The question of the French is not definitively resolved until Act 4. Kent's mention of Dover, however, provides a clue. Dover is a port city in the south of England where ships from France often landed. It is famous for its high and cliffs. As various characters begin moving southward toward Dover in the scenes that follow, the tension of an inevitable conflict heightens whatever the particulars of the political struggle. However, it is clear that Lear, by giving away his power to Britain to Goneril and Regan, and eventually Edmund has destroyed not only his own authority, but all authority. Instead of a stable hierarchical kingdom with Lear in control, chaos has overtaken the realm, and the country is at the mercy of the play's villains who care for nothing but their own power. The political chaos is mirrored in the natural world. We find Lear and his courtiers plodding across a deserted heath with winds howling around them and rain drenching them. Lear, like the other characters, is unused to so harsh conditions, and he soon finds himself symbolically stripped bare. He has already discovered that his cruel daughters can victimize him. Now he learns that a king caught in a storm is as much subject to the power of nature as any man. The importance of this storm and its symbolic connection to the state of mind of the people caught in it is first suggested by the knight's words to Kent. Kent asks the knight, "Who is there besides foul weather?" The knight answers, "One minded like the weather, most unquietly." Act 3, Scene 1. Here, the knight's state of mind is shown to be as turbulent as the winds and clouds surrounding him. This is true of Lear as well. When Kent asks the knight where the king is, the knight replies, contending with the fretful elements, strives in his little world of a man to outscorn the to and fro conflicting wind and rain. Shakespeare's use of pathetic fallacy, a literary device in which inanimate objects such as nature assume human reactions, amplifies the tension of the characters' struggles by elevating human forces to the level of natural forces. Lear is trying to face down the powers of nature, an attempt that seems to indicate both his despair and his increasingly confused sense of reality. Both of these strains appear in Lear's famous speech to the storm, in which he commands, "Blow, winds, and crack your rage, rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricanes, spout till you have uh, uh, drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks." Lear's attempt to speak to the storm suggests that he has lost touch with the natural world and its relation to it, or at least that he has lost touch with the ordinary human understanding of nature. In a sense, though, his diatribe against the weather embodies one of the central questions posed by King Lear, namely whether the universe is fundamentally friendly or hostile to man. Lear asks whether nature and the gods are actually good, and if so, how life can have treated him so badly. The storm. The storm marks one of the first appearances of the apocalyptic imagery that is so important in King Lear, and that will become increasingly dominant as the play progresses. The chaos reflects the disorder in Lear's increasingly crazed mind, and the apocalyptic language represents the projection of Lear's rage and despair onto the outside world. If this world has come to a symbolic end because his daughters have stripped away his power and betrayed him, then he seems to think the real world ought to end too. As we have seen, the chaos in nature also reflects the very real political chaos that has engulfed Britain in the absence of Lear's authority. Along with Lear's increasing despair and projection, we also see his understandable fixation on his daughters. Nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax you not, you elements, with unkindness. Lear tells the thunder that he does not blame it for attacking him because it does not owe him anything, but he does blame his two pernicious daughters for their betrayal. Despite the apparent onset of insanity, Lear exhibits some degree of rational thought. He is still able to locate the source of his misfortune. Finally, we see a strange shift beginning to occur inside Lear's mind. He starts to realize that he is going mad, a terrifying realization for anyone. Nevertheless, Lear suddenly notices his fool and asks him, "How dost my boy art cold?" He adds, "I have one part in my heart that's sorry yet for thee." Here, Lear takes real and compassionate notice of another human being for the first time in the play. This concern for other reflects the growth of Lear's humility, which eventually redeems him and enables him to win Cordelia's forgiveness. Now, scene 4 again. Kent leads Lear through the storm to the hovel. He tries to get him to go inside, but Lear resists, saying that his own mental anguish makes him hardly feel the storm. He sends his fool inside to take shelter, and they knees and prays. He reflects that as king, he took too little care for the wretched and homeless who have scant protection from storms such as his one. The fool runs out of the hovel, claiming that there is a spirit inside. The spirit turns out to be Edgar in his disguise as Tom O'Bedlam. Edgar plays the part of madman by complaining that he is being chased by a devil. He adds that faints possess and inhabit his body. Lear, whose grip on reality is loosening, sees nothing strange about these statements. He sympathizes with Edgar, asking him whether bad daughters have been the ruin of him as well. Lear asks the disguised Edgar what he used to be before he went mad and became a beggar. Edgar replies that he was once a wealthy courtier who spent his days having sex with many women and drinking wine. Observing Edgar's nakedness, Lear tears off his own clothes in sympathy. Gloucester, carrying a torch, comes looking for the king. He is unimpressed by Lear's companions and tries to bring Lear back inside the castle with him, despite the possibility of evoking Regan and Goneril's anger. Kent and Gloucester finally convince Lear to go with Gloucester, but Lear insists on bringing the disguised Edgar, whom he has begun to like, with him. Now, scene 5. Inside Gloucester's castle, Cornwall vows a revenge against Gloucester, whom Edmund has betrayed by showing Cornwall a letter that proves Gloucester's secret support of a French invasion. Edmund pretends to be horrified at the discovery of his father's treason, but he is actually delighted since the powerful Cornwall, now his ally, confers upon him the title of Earl of Gloucester. Cornwall sends Edmund to find Gloucester, and Edmund reasons to himself that if he can catch his father in the act of helping Lear, Cornwall's suspicions will be comforted. When Kent asks Lear to enter the hovel at the beginning of Act 3, Scene 4, Lear's reply demonstrates that part of his mind is still lucid, and that the symbolic connection between the storm outside the Lear's own mental disturbance is significant. Lear himself hardly notices it. The tempest in my mind doth from my senses take all feeling else. Lear's sensitivity to the storm is blocked out by his mental and emotional anguish and by his obsession with his treacherous daughters. The only thing that he can think of is their filial ingratitude. Lear also continues to show a deepening sensitivity to other people, a trait missing from his character at the beginning of the play, and in interesting and an interesting side effect of his increasing madness and exposure to human cruelty. After he sends his fool into the hovel to take shelter, he kneels in prayer, the first time we have seen him to do so in the play. He does not pray for himself. Instead, he asks the gods to help poor naked wretches, um, wheresoever you are, that bide the pelting of his pitiless storm. Reproaching himself for his heartlessness, Lear urges himself to explore thyself to feel that wretches feel. This self criticism and newfound sympathy for the plight of others mark the continuing humanization of Lear. Lear's obsessive contemplation of his own humanity and of his place in relation to nature and to the gods is heightened still further after he meets Edgar, who is clad only in rags. Lear's wandering uh, uh, mind turns to his own fine clothing, and he asks, addressing Edgar's largely covered body, is man no more than this? Consider him well, as a king in fact as well as in name, with servants, and subjects and seemingly loyal daughters. Lear could be confident of his place in the universe. Indeed, the universe seemed to revolve around him now as his humility grows. He becomes conscious of his real relationship to nature. He is frightened to see himself as a little more than a bare forked animal, stripped of everything that made him secure and powerful. So, dear students, I'm happy that I could conclude my lecture right now. So, this way, my lecture is over. Thank you. Have a good day.